Om Purnamada Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryanta Vande Guru Param Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti Om. Namaste. Welcome. I have been so busy this morning talking in Portuguese a lot. So let's hope my English is going to flow nicely. So we are open for our Q&A. I haven't seen any question in my email box. Does anybody has any sort of contribution for our satsang today? Yes, Claudio.
I have a contribution about my contemplation. I always have a hard time to recognize the five koshas, especially the intellectual, the sheet and the mental sheet. And can we talk again about the fact that the intellectual sheet that you cannot objectify? One time we say, and we read also in the Vivekachundamani, that we cannot objectify the intellectual sheet, right? I don't understand this completely. I'm there, and because I think I can see my thoughts, so what is that we cannot objectify? Why it is like consciousness? I understand that I cannot objectify consciousness. This is okay for me, but
yeah,
why I cannot objectify the intellectual sheet?
yeah. I mean, it is. This is a very subtle inquiry or discrimination. Understand? So we would need to begin by defining what is the intellect. So, or we would have to even define what is a jiva. As we know, a jiva is the reflection of consciousness on the subtle body, and the subtle body is constituted by several functions. So these functions, they are not separate and isolate. They are just one single organism, the subtle body, on which consciousness shines to produce the jiva, which is jiva atma. Consciousness reflect in this subtle body. The subtle body, when it shines with consciousness, it presents the individual jiva. And this mental, emotional, intellectual aspect of human experience is what we call the reflection of consciousness on the subtle body. You know, the jivatma, is consciousness. And we know that every time we receive an input from the field, from the environment, there is a stimulus coming from the environment. Immediately it comes with what? A thought and a feeling. There is no contact we do with the objects of the field of object, the field of experience, the Dharma field, our environment, howsoever we want to denominate it. It's, I mean, the objects of experience, the experience come and immediately there is a thought associated with it, or several thoughts, and with a feeling, and it's all defined by our vasanas, our likes and dislikes, to put it in simple language, okay? So the first aspect of our jivahood, let's say, of our experience, human experience as an individual, is the thought feeling that comes every time we encounter an object. And we know that objects, they may be a single thought that just arises from my causal body. That is an object, a subtle object. There is a thought that comes from my unconscious mind and pops into my conscious mind. Immediately, there is that thought and the feeling associated with that. Okay, all of these are objects. So this first experience that we have with objects or subtle objects or dense objects, okay, is what we call the mind. The mind is this function of the subtle body that feels and then presents a thought to it, and doubts, it questions, We know that the first thing for us is the impact of that experience, and then we give it a name to it. There is a thought to it, and there is a doubting, questioning. Now, what I'm going to do with it? Do I want it? Do I appreciate it? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it going to provide me with a sense of security and peace, or it's going to be danger or whatever? So all this is the emotional aspect of the Jiva Atma, you understand? And then Vedanta is a very brilliant kind of exposition of the way we function, the way we operate by Isvara, or howsoever we want to say it, or by consciousness itself, So the first aspect of this Jiva Atma is that once it got in contact and had thought and feelings about this experience, it begins questioning. And then immediately comes the discerning and determining factor of the Jiva Atma. So this determining, discriminating, discerning, choosing aspect of the Jiva Atma is what we call our intellectual faculty, okay? So now, what is the difference between the emotions, the mind, the emotional center, the emotional thought center of our subtle body, or the Jiva Atma, better, more precisely, technically explained. So what is the difference between this emotional center and the intellectual center? What is the main difference, Claudio?
Is that that the intellect choose what to do with the input, we can say, with the stimulus. It chooses, it takes a decision, we can say.
Yeah. So the intellect choose, and the intellect choose because the intellect is subtler than the mind. This emotional thought function of the subtle body, or this emotional thought aspect of our Jiva Atma experience, is an object appearing to the intellect. Don't you agree that the intellect is subtler? That which is subtler can objectify the denser can objectify the subtler, because those are sub-orders within this Mithya order of reality. Those are sub-orders within Jiva, which is a sub-order within Mithya. You understand? In Mithya, we have 3 sub-orders, Isvara, Jiva, and within Jiva, we have other dimensions of existence, realms of experience, densities, of energy. We everything here is energy, okay? So the intellect is subtle. The intellect has the ability to witness, objectify, and experience and know the emotional aspect. The intellect has the ability to experience, witness, and decide or look for or search for in our memory archives. Okay, we know, I need to remember this, So we know that all those other aspects, they are denser. Another aspect of our subtle body, our jivahood, is what? Is our ego. Our ego is that self ideas we have, that those nice, good ideas or bad ideas we have of ourselves, that can be witnessed and objectified by the intellect, to the extent that the intellect is a little subtler. The intellect has to be more and more subtle in order to objectify the thoughts, the emotions, the sensations, the memories, and the sense of doership, ownership, authorship. All of that requires the intellect, which is a little subtle. Otherwise, the intellect is totally identified with those denser functions of one's jivahood. Understand? So the intellect can witness, identify. If the intellect is subtle enough, it can say, okay, I can see my ego, it's really going out of control. Understand? I can see my emotions, I can see my memories coming up. I can see memories coming up from, my childhood, okay? Emotions, sensations, and all these aspects of our human experience. So now the intellect is up there in the chart projected by Ramji, beautifully, yeah, design is up there because the intellect is subtler, and that there is a verse in the Gita, I forgot the chapter of the Gita, in which it says exactly this, So we have the body, and then we have the pranas, and then we have the mind, and then we have the ego, we have the intellect. So from there, James said, okay, I'm going to make a chart, following the footsteps of my guru. Shimayananda has made the BMI chart, and James made a chart which was more sophisticated. And since then, he has expanding, all his charts. So the intellect is there because it's the most subtle aspect of our subtle body. Okay, so the jiva, the best way to understand the jiva is to know that the jiva is this reflection of consciousness in this subtle aspect of the subtle body called the intellect. I often say that the jiva is the subtle intellect, because the subtle intellect can witness the other functions that occur in the mental, ego level, memory aspects, and so on, So we can see the intellect, and that sometimes I go to the extent to say that the intellect is the jiva. You understand? Because what defines the best what we are as jiva atma, then the brightness or the reflection of consciousness in this subtle aspect, which is our intellect, the subtle intellect, that one that can observe everything, including the other functions of the subtle body, okay? So now your question is, I don't understand very well how we can say that the intellect cannot be really objectified. Is that your question?
No.
So in some of our texts, we will say that the intellect, it can be objectified because there is something about us that is aware of our most subtle discriminations or intellectual notions, or all these very, very subtle notions of the intellect, these discriminating notions, it's somehow, we know that they are there, okay? Sometimes in retrospective, okay? And then we say the witness is just in retrospective, it's just looking at its very notions, we can say. But here and there, we say that the intellect is also an object, when we stand in awareness as awareness, you understand? But the awareness, standing awareness as awareness, is not something that can be experienced, in duality as subject, because awareness or consciousness is not an experiencing, knowing entity, you understand? But we say here and there that the intellect is another object when we stand in awareness as awareness. So from the perspective of awareness, the intellect is an object, okay? Now, the intellect is the instrument, is the tool we have to gain self-knowledge. So you probably heard this statement over and over and over, including Ramana Maharaj has said it long ago. By knowledge and knowledge alone, the self can be realized. In other words, you can really know yourself only by the means of knowledge. And know yourself is to know that Jivatma, the intellect, is Paramatma. This is self-knowledge, okay? It's only by understanding. This understand takes place in the intellect. You understand? It takes place in the intellect because intellect is the aspect of the jiva that feels to be an isolated, independent entity suffering from a sense of limitation, inadequacy, insufficiency, and so on. It suffers, okay? So the jiva and the intellect of the jiva, is only the intellect of the jiva can understand its true, fundamental, free, independent nature as consciousness. Consciousness cannot know that because consciousness is not the knower. Consciousness is the knowing principle, the existence principle, the conscious principle that once associated with the jiva appears as the knower and then becomes the jiva, and unfortunately it identifies with the three bodies, identify with the koshas, identify with the gross food body, with the pranas, with the emotional level, and identifies with the intellect itself. The intellect is the most subtle identification of consciousness in association with the jiva. You understand? With the subtle body, as we often say. So no, this intellect is the instrument in which this understanding that the jiva is consciousness may occur. Okay, we know consciousness is not an object of knowledge. You understand? And the jiva atma, the intellect, the purified sattvic subtle intellect, this very subtle intellect, it's going to come to a point in which it has tried to solve this human fundamental, essential, existential problem, this sense of limitation and inadequacy. It tries to solve this problem by all other means, including by the means of intellectual, academic, scientific knowledge. Okay, so after it has exhausted all attempts to try to resolve this fundamental problem, it becomes interested in this self-investigation, self-inquiry, in association or following the scriptures, in contact with the scriptures. So only by this proper use of the intellect, following the logic as presented by the scriptures, in association with our gurus, etc., the intellect can understand its real nature, its real identity as Paramatma. It occurs in the intellect, okay? So since the intellect is Brahma, intellect is Paramatma, so the intellect cannot really divide itself in two and be a witness of itself, you understand? Because fundamentally the intellect is consciousness. And it wants to know that. I want to know, I heard that I am consciousness, but the intellect has no means to, to divide itself in two. The intellect does not even match of the possibility to divide itself in two and witness objectively, I am objecting my intellect. No, I'm going to object maybe some of my intellectual notions. You understand? My intellectual notions, I can revise, I can observe, I can see them being developed. And when we see that we are seeing these things taking place, and then we can only say that we are seeing it as awareness, although awareness is not really a seer of phenomenal object, you understand? But all of this is within the realm of the intellect. The intellect is just elaborating and contemplating, discriminating, discerning, developing new ideas and new theories and expanding scientific knowledge, and all of this, okay? And then it comes a point that the intellect wants to know its true nature. And then the only means to know that, since the nature of the intellect, Paramatma, is not an object of knowledge, is by the pramana called the scriptures, because this knowledge is only possible if the intellect understands that I am consciousness, I am Paramatma. And this can only happen in the intellect. the knowledge, the intellect is consciousness, happens in the intellect, and it's a knowledge that immediately resolves or gradually, let's say gradually, dissolves the sense of inadequacy, insufficiency, and insecurity, and so on, which is totally derived of this misidentification with one's notions, misidentification with one's feelings, memories, histories, and the physical body. You know? So now, I don't know if I have covered your question, but the intellect, it cannot really be seen because the one who is seeing the intellect is the intellect itself, unless we say that there is a principle called awareness in which the intellect occurs, and then we can understand that the principle that is really aware of the intellect is consciousness, which is a fact, because it's by consciousness the intellect can retrospect and observe its very, very intellectual notions. It has to revise, it has to again and again re-examine, you understand? And again. This is the entire process of the Vedanta is the intellect following the logic as presented by the Upanishads and contemplating, reflecting, re-examining, resolving doubts, developing this confidence in this means of knowledge, developing confidence in one's self-knowledge of I am consciousness. So all of this is the very active, the finest possible activity that the intellect can engage itself with, develop. You understand? This all of this is within the realm of the intellect. You understand? So I don't know if I have covered your question, because as I said, it's a very subtle question. Yes, Ruth?
Would you say that this is Sakshi? Sakshi, the witness?
Yeah.
The intellect that you're referring to?
Yeah, Sakshi is another notion, another name that we give to, okay?
The intellect, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is very, very subtle. So it's hard to understand because it's very, very subtle. And you know, as I tell you, I do a lot of fear of like vipassana things, no meditation. So it's hard for me to get rid of all the notions, you know. And so when I do something like vipassana, it's always the same intellect that sees itself, right?
Yeah, I mean, I call the meditator the subtle intellect.
Yeah.
Especially before I got in contact with Vedanta. So because it is Osho used to call the watcher on the hill. You know, he used the one up there, the aspect of our jivahood that can observe the other levels of human experience, including the mental, emotional, and all that. So the intellect is the meditator. So when it meditates, it's going to be watching phenomena and interpreting all phenomena according to its intellectual notions, its intellectual programs and ideas, and so on. So they have to understand that the intellect is not really separate from its notions until the intellect becomes a pure reflection of consciousness. And then in that reflector, in that intellect, there is only the sense, thought, feeling, I am, I exist, which was the meditation proposed by Nisargadatta Maharaj. Okay, you just stay as what he used to call pure consciousness, which is not pure consciousness. That has caused a lot of confusion. That is a reflection of consciousness in a very sattvic intellect. And then you are there as the sense, thought, feeling, I am, I exist. So when we meditate, in the beginning, we examine, we observe phenomena, and when we observe, we are going to be making our commentaries, you know, I say, oh yes, this, I don't like this, you know, and then we're going to see that is another level of mind, of thought, you know, a sattva, but still judging those denser aspects of the mind. So, but it comes, the goal of the meditator is to develop a very, very scientific mind, scientific intellect, you know, in which there is this silence that Ramji likes to call the silence. And a lot of the time he associates this silence as the self, Ramji. He just does that. Okay. So when there is this silence, it's this pure reflection of consciousness in a silent intellect, you know. He's no longer being a commentator. He's just watching phenomena. Very, very quiet. So this is the best intellectual platform to go back and contemplate into the teachings of the Upanishads, the teachings of Vedanta. So when we have a mind in which the commentator has shut up, you understand, it's very peaceful, it's very silent, and then we feed it with the teachings of Vedanta. That is what we call Nididhyasana as meditation, because we are talking about an Nididhyasana in which you sit down to meditate, but you don't meditate only to produce this silence. You want to have this silence as an intermediary goal. And then from there, you're going to contemplate. You're going to do your real Nididhyasana, which is reflecting and contemplate on the teachings of Vedanta. You understand? That's the only way, because you want to address the root cause of the problem of mental disturbance, right? So the intellect is the watcher on the hill. The intellect, the subtle intellect, is the very nature of reflex consciousness, being there, witnessing phenomena until it stops any commentaries, and then it shines as a pure reflector. You understand? And that's the best environment to feed the intellect with the teachings of Vedanta. I don't know if it does answer your question still.
Yes, it clarifies. It clarifies
a little bit.
Of course, yes. Of course, I have to work on that, but I understand that yes, there are, because I say you again that I do a lot of work on this in the past years. So, but now it's good to me to clarify all this, no? So I can recognize, because as you said, the intellect is the one who discriminates, the function that discriminates. So I now understand the self, that I cannot objectify the self, but I can understand the self, and I can see every time the self, but only through understanding, because it's the presence that is underneath everything, but I cannot see it. I can see only objects, continually objects that appears, and I have to train the intellect. Okay, but it's like I have understand better now the self, that the cautious so, but I have to understand everything. So
the only difficulty that we have, which is your difficulty, is this attempt to see the self as an object of knowledge. You understand? So you can only see the self by understanding that you self, and this is the entire purpose of Vedanta. You know, I mean, Tattvamansi is the most fundamental, essential statement of Vedanta. Is a condensation of Vedanta is in that statement, Jivatma is Paramatma. So that's the only way, Claudio, you're gonna see the self as your own self. But you're not going to see with your eyes. You're gonna see through the eyes of wisdom, and these eyes of wisdom requires means of wisdom, which is the Upanishad Vedanta. You need a pramana, which is the means by which one develops this wisdom. Wisdom is to know that I am consciousness. You understand? So never going to find the self in any of these objects of knowledge. You want to objectify yourself. So, and then you know, you have to clearly understand that you are the one shining in the very intellect, making it possible for the intellect to objectify anything below its level
Yes.
of subtlety. Understand?
Yeah.
The intellect is going to objectify the mind, the ego, the memories, everyone's denser notions, and the prana is going to identify, objectify everything. And why is the how the intellect goes about knowing what it knows? How the intellect goes about not knowing what it does not know? By the grace of consciousness, by the grace of the self. So you need to
Yes.
understand, you know, the end of this search, it's when you really understand that you are the self and you cannot be seen and known the same way we see everything else in media, the same way we know in everything else in media, because you are the essence of the knower, you are the consciousness that enlivens the intellect to make the intellect a jiva, the one who experience and know. You need to go back and back to these statements every time you begin trying to figure out the self objectively. You have to understand that the self is that conscious existence principle that allows the intellect to objectify phenomena. But how can something which is the principle, the substratum, you know, feeding the intellect, enlivening the intellect, you know, giving life and consciousness to the intellect, how can that, which is the subtlest of the subtle, the most subtle of the subtle, scriptures say that the intellect, the consciousness, is the most subtle of the subtle. In terms of our human experience, the intellect is the most subtle, our conscious experience.
Yes.
Yeah? So consciousness, that which shines in the intellect, is the most subtle of the subtle. This is a very famous and popular statement of the Upanishads. Okay? So how can the intellect objectify that? It's impossible. But the intellect can understand. And this understand is not inferential knowledge. Some people, sometimes they misunderstand. They think the self-knowledge is inferential knowledge. No. Self-knowledge is a direct knowledge. You understand? It's a direct understanding that, oh, I'm not the intellect, I'm the consciousness that shines in my intellect. You understand? I am the consciousness that's enlivening my intellect. Okay? So this is called aparoksha jnana, direct and immediate knowledge. It's not objective knowledge, and it's not inferential knowledge. Inferential knowledge is based on perceptive knowledge. You understand? So self-knowledge cannot be gained by perception and inference. Self-knowledge can be gained by direct knowledge.
Mm-hmm. But can we say that we are with the scripture we learn to have a real interpretation of the reality? Can we say that it's an interpretation, because the intellect when he has knowledge, when the intellect have self-knowledge, can interpret correctly the reality, the object? Can we say that is an interpretation?
Reality, I don't know if I really understood your question, but I guess so. I mean, reality, we see the context of Vedanta, reality satya, is consciousness, is the only reality.
Exactly.
So when we interpret phenomena, we are interpreting no reality, okay? So when we are interpreting what happens in media, that which can be experienced and known, and we need to try to understand what's going on in media, you know, it's natural for us to try to understand. So when we are doing that, we are interpreting no reality, okay? So who or what is interpreting no reality? It is the jiva, the intellect, you understand?
The intellect.
Makes up. So the jiva can never really interpret the self. The jiva can only understand that the jivatma is the self. You understand? And this is possible not based on sensorial, perceptive, inferential knowledge. No, it's by scriptural knowledge. Scriptural knowledge is a knowledge that was revealed by consciousness through Mr. Isvara for all jivas. You understand? It's what we call sometimes pure knowledge. It's not originated by any jiva. When the jiva brings forth a knowledge, it's based on perception and inference. So the knowledge that Ishvara provides us through the scriptures is called revealed knowledge. It's pure knowledge. It is knowledge that refers to our experience in Mithya, because after all, Vedanta is but the re-examination of our experience that were not really properly understood, you understand? So that we can redefine ourselves. We can understand our true nature rather than our apparent nature, you understand? And we have to go through the experience of the jiva, which are all based on perception and inferential knowledge, you understand? Perception and inferential knowledge. This is Mithya. Self-knowledge and the scriptures, they make use of perception and inference, but they don't about moksha as a perceptive-based or inferential-based knowledge, because self-knowledge is not a perceptive-based, inferential-based knowledge. It's the direct knowledge of the jiva in respect to your true identity as consciousness that shines in the intellect. You understand? I don't know. You were talking about the scriptural knowledge, or this logic presents Vedanta as an interpretation. No, it's not an interpretation by any jiva.
I mean, a yani, the one who has self-knowledge, for example, experience something in reality. For example, I experience a bottle, but I know that this bottle is also consciousness. I know it through the intellect. So the one who don't have self-knowledge thinks, okay, this is an object, a real object, and he sees only the objects, okay? The one who has self-knowledge sees an object in reality, but he knows that in reality he is the self, no, the subject and not the object.
Right.
He knows that he cannot see the subject. He knows that he cannot see it, but he knows it. So this is a correct interpretation of the reality. So he sees that reality is not real. At the same time, he relates with reality. He's in Mithya, but he knows also through the object that he is the subject. This is I mean that with the interpretation. It's not an intellectual, it's an interpretation based on the scripture, on the Upanishads.
So as far as
he can discriminate.
Yeah, as far as the experience goes, or the yani experience, as you have put, you know, the yani is the one who has the knowledge in respect to its true identity, your true nature. Is the one who knows that I am consciousness. This is what the yani is, okay? So the way he relates to Mithya may appear different from person to person. So this knowledge that I am consciousness and everything is consciousness, it stays in the background. It's almost stays like in the unconscious, subconscious. Yeah. And then the jiva is going to, the yani or the jiva mukta is going to see a bottle, and he's not going to see the bottle and say, oh, give me this piece of consciousness here that serves the purpose of, you know, containing. No, it's not going to think, oh, I'm here holding a piece of consciousness which is designed to hold some apparent money. No, he does not think in terms of that. You understand? He knows this knowledge. This knowledge remains in the background. You understand? And it's good, therefore, what? For minimize the impacts, you know, of avidya. When avidya comes and then we have you know, and then this knowledge which is there in the background, it's at our disposal for you. That's what Ramji says is the knowledge that's always good because it's at our disposal every time that you know that Maya and Avidya surface, you understand? But the Yanni is not necessarily the one that goes around seeing consciousness. No, he's going to see the object.
Of course.
Here and there, he relates to the object. He says, oh, I love this bottle, you know, and oh, my bottle broke. And then the knowledge comes and says, so what? You know?
So, exactly.
Everything is consciousness. I am consciousness. You know, I can live very well without this bottle that I was carrying for the past 10 years. You understand?
Yes.
So it's this hard and fast knowledge. It's something that remains, you know, in the background or in our causal body, and it serves the purpose of somehow protect us, you know, against those moments in which Maya comes, you know, either with
we get attached to
extreme papa or extreme punya that may deceive even the Yanni, you understand?
Yeah.
Oh, what a tragedy, you know. And then this knowledge has to come up front and say, hey, there is here excitement, you know, depression or, you know, total peak of, you know, happiness and
happiness.
Oh, there is something going on here because there is mental disturbance. Okay, and then okay, I'm here for this. I'm here to protect you. You understand? I'm here, you know, as a cushion, you know, as an airbag, or as the scriptures say, as a bumper, a car bumper. You know, protect the jiva against the shocks of life. You understand? So those are all analogies for the benefit or the impact of this self-knowledge. But it's not that the Yanni goes around, you know, not seeing the others and not seeing names and forms. And why the Yanni does not see things like that? Because all names and forms of Mithya belongs to Ishvara. Yanni cannot do anything about that. You understand?
Yeah.
So the world is not going to go anywhere. The names, colors, and forms are going to be there, ready to deceive any human being, including the Yannis. But the Yannis have this knowledge. They say, "Opa, no, you know, oh, I should never get excited because I know that everything is consciousness. You know, things can get as bad as we can imagine, can get as good as we may imagine." But, you know, the Yanni is the one who begins developing or develops that sense of equanimity, you know, and appreciation for all punyas and papas of life.
Great, thank you.
You are welcome, Claudio. Thank you for your contribution. Great contribution.
Arlindo, would you be able to talk a bit, or would you talk a bit? I know you can, but would you talk a bit more about why? What's the teaching point behind Isvara I and Isvara II? Why can't we just have Isvara? What's the teaching point?
Well,
what are we trying to get across there between having, you know, Isvara I and Isvara II? I'm really wrestling with this one.
Well, these are only words. You understand? We need to understand words. They serve a certain purpose. The words they get together to create sentence, and the goal, the aim of words and sentence is to deliver a concept, deliver a notion. So it's always better we understand the concept and that we don't get too much attached to the words itself. Otherwise, we're in trouble. Because as we know in the Upanishads, we have several words that means Brahman. You know, we have dozens or hundreds of words, Chaitanya and so on, to describe Satchitananda. So if we get attached to the words, and then we find a lot of conflicts and contradictions, you understand? And we get in trouble. We need to understand what that word is represent, what the word is conveying, you know? It's conveying something, okay? So what is Ishvara? Generally speaking, within the context of the teachings of Vedanta, Ishvara is Brahma, let's say. Ishvara is the Lord of Mithya. Ishvara is the lawgiver. Ishvara is the karma paladata, the one who delivers the parabada karmas of all human beings. Yeah? So this is Ishvara, is this intelligent order of creation, is this intelligent structure in which all jivas, you know, can come and process one's karmas, you understand? So this is Ishvara. So what is Brahman? Dave?
I guess I always think of Brahman as
What is the difference between the concept of Ishvara and the concept of Brahman?
Right, I guess I don't, I'm thinking Brahman not as a concept.
Huh?
I'm thinking Brahman not so much as a concept, but rather as the supreme consciousness, where
Yeah.
Ishvara is more of a concept, which is to discuss about, you know, the power, if you will, of Brahman as it's reflected.
Absolutely. Yeah. There we go. You have the answer. Ishvara is just energy. It's very intelligent energy, you know, pure knowledge, pure sattva. Okay. So this is Ishvara, is what? Is consciousness under the spell of Maya to create Ishvara, the all-knowing principle. You understand? Ishvara, Brahman, in association, in appearance association with Maya, brings about the all-knowing conscious being called Ishvara, the all-knowing. But Ishvara is Mithya. Ishvara is energy. Okay, very, very subtle, intelligent energy. But that is Ishvara. And Brahman, what is Brahman? Brahman is consciousness, awareness, existence, you know, not associate with Maya. But, you know, this notion of associate with and no associate also needs to be understood, because consciousness and Brahman, even in association with Maya, even under the superimposition of Jiva, Ishvara, Jiva, and Jagat, this Brahman, this consciousness is absolutely free and independent from Ishvara, Jiva, and Jagat. Now, even to say that Brahman is consciousness, awareness, exists, and not associate with Maya is also misleading. Because the only way to understand Brahman is the only reality, is the substratum of this universe, which goes far beyond all universe. Okay? It's the only reality. Ishvara, Jiva, and Jagat, they are just projections or superimpositions on Brahman, which is consciousness, existence, yeah, limitlessness, yeah, present in everything. You understand? Beyond time. So, what is Brahman? Brahman is the only reality. Brahman is Satchitananda, is existence itself, is consciousness itself, and it is of a limitless nature. It's beyond time. This is Brahman. And what is Ishvara? Oh, Ishvara is a phenomenon that occurs every time Maya comes into operation, and then it brings about the creator of the creation. You understand? The pure knowledge, the all-knower, the all-knowing principle called Sattva that brings forth, with the help of Rajas and Tamas, which are the gunas provided by Maya. The three gunas are the building blocks of this universe, and Ishvara is the one who is going to start, putting them together, developing the subtle elements and creating these infinite numbers of objects. So Ishvara is consciousness, whenever consciousness somehow is under the spell of Maya, and Maya brings Ishvara, Maya brings Jiva, and Maya brings the universe. You understand? So to call Ishvara, Brahman Ishvara I and God Ishvara II, you understand? It gives room to a lot of confusion. That's why I don't like to use Ishvara I, Ishvara II. I prefer to refer to Brahman and Ishvara. And traditionally, God in Vedanta, God, the Lord, the ones that we pray for, and we want things, we want a little help, and so on. God, this God, Ishvara, is referred to in Vedanta as Ishvara. And then within Ishvara, we have all sorts of representatives, so to speak, so to say. Krishna, and Vishnu, Sarasvati, and Ganesh, and all kinds of, deities. They are all Ishvara, present themselves according to the prayers, the desires, the wishes of the devotees. If you want something, you go to this God. If you want something else, go to that God. You want a child, go to this God. If you want a perfect wife, go to that God. You want wealthy, go to that other God. You understand? But it's all Ishvara. There is one Ishvara, there is one Lord, there is one knowing principle, conscious principle, is Ishvara, but it appears as if infinite, distinct deities. But these are just kind of salespeople. The salespeople, they go out there, but they are all, representing the owner of the corporation, of the company. You understand? So in Brahman, what's Brahman? Brahman is the essential nature of Ishvara. Brahman is the essential nature of Jiva and Jagat.
So Orlando?
Just a second, Karen. Is it still, you're still troubled by this notion of Brahman and Ishvara? Forget about Ishvara 1 and 2.
Well, okay, I was just had a question based on the same as Dave.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Karen.
That's still like Satya and Mithya then, really? Brahman would be Satya and Ishvara is more in Mithya?
Yeah.
Or
but don't tell it to most people, because people they don't like to hear that Ishvara is not really real, that God is not really real, Can be experienced. It brings forth this universe as we know it, but everything is Mithya, is made out of Mithya, and the nature of Mithya is the not self. You understand? So, but the people who adore gods, the gods, they don't like to hear that. They are angry with the Vedantins for that sort of kind of statement. So, and it's a dangerous statement because we don't want to throw Ishvara the same way we don't want to throw the baby with the bath water. You understand? Ishvara is important, absolutely essential to understand and to develop a devotional attitude, loving attitude towards the Creator is absolutely fundamental in this process of ours of spiritual elevation. You understand?
I keep thinking what you're saying, and maybe Karen's saying this, but to me, Ishvara is the bridge between Satya and Mithya.
That's a good way to put it. Ramji often says that Ishwara is the key in this for self-knowledge, you know?
So for those of us who also have spent a lot of time with Ramji, he talks about Ishwara 1 and 2, but you're differentiating yourself as you teach by saying that, Ishwara is Ishwara, so you don't really focus on the 1 and the 2 piece. So you're advising just kind of let that go and let Ishwara be Ishwara.
Yeah, that's my advice. I mean, I have unfolded a few times this notion of Ishvara 1 and 2, but I have I have found that it creates confusion. And as I explained in the beginning, we should never get tied up with words, but we need to understand the content of the words, what the words are pointing to. We should never grab the signing post, but see and understand what the signing post is pointing us to. You understand? I'm not in any contradiction with any teachings of Ramji, because he teaches pure Vedanta. It's just different ways that one may prefer to unfold it. You understand?
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, just as a minor question, but I was just back in verse 74. There's a reference to the Chandogya Upanishad. Is that, I'm not saying that right, but that Upanishad focuses on you are that. Is that something to pursue in terms of like trying to understand that Upanishad? Is that a potential next step?
Well, the Panchadasi, for example, is considered to be the most well-organized and extensive text of modern text of Vedanta. You understand? So it was written by Vidyaranya Swami not long ago, a few centuries ago, 400 or 450 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. So when you have a text like that, that text contains the essence of all Upanishads in a better language, better organized, structured, gradually, And so those are the work of our most important Mahatmas, you understand? There is somebody who came a little late here. This is a very, very important work that was given to us from these pillars in our Sampradaya, you understand? Being Vidyaranya Swami and Shankaracharya, two of those. So if we want to go and look into the Upanishads, we can do it. I mean, I did a seminar in Brazil recently that I covered two short Upanishads, Now, it was Kena Upanishad and actually Atma Bodha, which is another text written by another Swami. So, but what I'm trying to say is that we don't need to go and really study Upanishads, because what we started with Dayananda, with Paramarthananda, with Ramji, with Vidyaranya, with Shankaracharya, it is the essence of the Upanishads in any case, okay? But it does not stop us from going there and studying these Upanishads as they are, you understand? You understand? So if there is a text that I would say we could do in the future, if this small group holds, once we are done with the Viveka Shuddhamani, I would suggest we either go into the Panchadasi, which is a wonderful text that I love more and more, or we could go deep into the Gita, but the Gita, some of you did not long ago with Ramji there in Carbondale. So, you understand, Dave? It does not hurt.
I think I understand. I think I'm making, I understand. I just have this compelling pursuit that I keep wanting to go back to the source. I keep going, what's behind this? What's behind this? So where did this come from? Where did this come from? And you talk about this, a lot, that kind of the subtleness, and I keep wanting to go back, and I keep wondering, should I be going back, and should I be learning Sanskrit? So would it be ultimately, does this jiva, this intellect, need to learn Sanskrit and study the Upanishads in their original form? I'm reluctant to want to do that. It seems like it's a exercise that almost procrastinates just actually, becoming, moving beyond self-realization and moving into self-actualization. It seems like it's an exercise. So I'm just kind of curious, and I think it's a good connection to understand that, like the Panchadasi, these things that are written, what do they refer back to, and what's their core, what's their essence?
Yeah, there is nothing new. You understand? All these texts, they are extractions from the Upanishads. There is nothing new. Okay, all these great works of Vidyaranya, for example, there is nothing new. Everything is extracted by the Upanishads. You understand? And here and there he says from this Upanishad, from there, and then he elaborates. There is nothing new in the Gita. The Gita is all, extract from the Jnana Yoga, the Bhagavad Gita is all Upanishads. You understand? The people did not create anything new. They just compiled it differently, on different times. So we are dealing with the Upanishads all the time because those are the same concept, the same notion, the same teachings, the same analogies, the same metaphor. It all comes from the Upanishads after all,
Is it the same thing with the Brahma Sutras?
The Brahma Sutras is a bit different. The Brahma Sutras are more intellectual, philosophical discussions. And it is for some people who have a very, very doubting intellectual mind that wants to really scrutinize into the nature of certain statements of Vedanta. And it can be very, very smoking. One time I was doing a seminar in Brazil years ago in a place called Joanópolis. And then a guy came into the class. No, he was in the class. And somehow he wants to challenge me a little bit. And he brought some Brahma Sutra text. And he said, okay, so why don't we do this Brahma Sutra here? And and then I said, we can try to do it. And then he gave me the book. He was in India. He brought some Brahma Sutras, which are nothing but commentaries of people who unfolded with an attitude of people in opposition to the statement discussions, about people who are Dharma combats, a lot of Dharma combats in there, and they go very subtle in those discussions. So he gave me the book and he said, okay, so I would like you to teach this book tomorrow in class. So I looked into the statements and the book and the discussion. I said, oh my God, this gives me a headache. It was in the evening. Okay, I said, but what are we going to do now? I'm going to go there and I'm going to work on this one. And I had to work very hard to follow those head-splitting discussions, you understand? Which are not really essential for self-knowledge. but it may be essential if one has a very doubting mind, you understand? A very scrutinizing mind. So I went in the next day, I say, okay, I did some work here, but this is not essential to self-knowledge. And I'm pretty much sure that if we do 1 hour of this, I'm going to lose everybody here. And people they may not even come back for the next class anymore, you know, because it's very, very subtle, very philosophical, very dry, and very tiring for the intellect, you understand? But some people need that. Some people love that, you understand?
Mhm.
So Brahma Sutras, it's a text, according to Ramji, that it's okay and it may be helpful, especially for teachers, because here and there the teacher can be approached by one of these students, and then he has to be prepared. Or they may do just like I do. I have been helping to propagate these teachings by unfolding to the best of my ability the meaning of these teachings. And whenever there is someone who comes with philosophical discussions, pairing and objecting, and when they start moving into this kind of dharma combat nature, you know, I tell them I don't do that. I just unfold the teachings, you know, and this is a platform in which people benefit from the unfoldment of these teachings, and I don't do that. I did not study enough to go deep into this discussion between this line, this philosophy against this philosophy, this line of another. I just don't do that, and period. Okay. Ruth, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I said, isn't this why we study Shankara's text? Because he systematized those teachings and made it very clear. His Sanskrit was very precise, and we have the interpretations of that. So in that sense, we don't need to go back to those original texts because they are confusing, as you say, and they contradict. But Shankara and subsequent, schools after him or who ascribed to his system provided that to us in a very clear way.
Yeah, very good.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means, you know. I mean, we have this teacher who did a lot of good work. You see, when you get
Yes.
into this, I want to go into Kena Upanishad because it's a short one. And let's play with it. Beautiful, a lot of beautiful verses there.
Mm-hmm.
I had to find one, and then every school, every kind of different schools, you know, of Vedanta had different interpretations. And then you see, I was watching that and I was saying, wow, there are so many misleading notions or interpretations which are experiential, which are esoteric, mystical. And then I had to fix it a little bit, to adjust it to our sampradaya, you know, which is it's not mystical Vedanta, it's not esoteric Vedanta, you know, it's non-dual, Shankaracharya-based sampradaya. So you're running different difficulties even to find the original texts, which are never original, but they were written, translated, and commented by certain swamis, you know.
And let's not forget that this was done over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. That these things were debated and discussed. So to get the essence as we are now is truly wonderful gift.
Let's hope this knowledge is not destroyed by any means, you know.
Right.
To begin from the scratch would be, and another day I was thinking about, just imagine if we lose this knowledge. To begin from,
I often laugh when James is teaching. It doesn't matter what book he's teaching. It always comes down to the same thing base, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Okay. But it does not stop you from playing with the Upanishads, Dave. So.
I No, you don't stop me from doing that.
Mhm.
I have a vasana, if you will, to kind of go that way.
Yeah.
But there's another thing that's pulling me, which is really moving from self-realization to self-actualization. And I'm really right now, I feel like I'm more drawn to self-actualization than I am to just more intellectual study.
Yeah, but self-knowledge and self-actualization is not like theory and practice. It's not like self-knowledge is the hard and fast knowledge, is the doubtless knowledge that I am conscious. This is self-knowledge, you understand? And then self-actualization, which is synonymous of moksha, is when the self-knowledge is so deeply established in the intellect that somehow that it cancels a big chunk of ignorance that somehow supports the ego sense of doership, ownership, and so on, you know. So moksha or self-actualization is a gradual process that begins with this hard and fast, doubtless self-knowledge, you understand? And then gradually the vasanas, the old vasana, the remainings of avidya, they are going to be gradually dissolved, yeah? To the extent that you hold this self-knowledge, you hold your association with this scriptural knowledge and our teachers, and then this will gradually convert this self-knowledge, which is nothing but this doubtless certainty in respect to what you are, which is the nature of everything, okay? And then moksha is nothing but the fructification of self-knowledge in the sense that your tamasic or rajasic vasanas are going to gradually be converted into sattvic, you know, dharmic vasanas in the way that you becomes more and more and more like closer and closer to a beautiful person, a wise person, saint. You understand? Your life is a life in which your self-knowledge and your life, they are not really two different things, you know? Is the fructification of self-knowledge, but it begins with this doubtless self-knowledge. You understand that it's not like theory and practice. It's not like intellectual and existential. You know, it's difficult to put in words what self-knowledge is, but you are right in the sense that this self-knowledge, it needs to manifest in due time as self-actualization, meaning to say freedom. Freedom from what, Dave? Self-knowledge is freedom. This moksha word, freedom is freedom from ignorance, freedom from suffering, freedom from you know, a lot of these you know, activities that we have that are driven by remainings of ignorance, you know, like, to put it that way. Okay. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnatya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Arlindo.
Meet you again, Isvara willing. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Inshallah.
Huh?
Inshallah.
Hmm.
God willing.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Joe Biden said that in
Yeah.
in a debate. So
I see. I heard he's doing well. Is that so?
I hear he's doing well, and but then you hear the next news report is like how much support there is still for Trump, and for not so much the man, but for the beliefs and the positioning of America, and so I think it's less and less about the man, and the people who are there are supporting him because of his underlying core, and That's the debate. It's really not between two personalities. It's really between, I think,
The principle.
the principles and just how you want to approach,
Mhm.
you know, how do you want to grow the economy? How do you want to take care of all the things? It's a very fundamental, and it's much more subtle than it appears in the Twitter tweets.
Okay, good. We shall see.
Arlindo, and do you remember, we have a time change in the United States?
Yeah,
So it'll be an hour later
yeah, and then
on Sunday.
yeah, it affects the people in Europe. Today they have come.
Oh, it does.
In
Okay.
the last few meetings, they are coming a little earlier, and then we go back to the same time gap as always.
Okay.
Look, thank you, Karen.
Ciao.
Okay, I'm
Ciao.
ending the meeting. Bye, Claudio.